The night shift clock clicks over, and the plant exhales, steam curling from roof vents into December dark, snow ticking the sawtooth panes like impatient fingers. May Russo touches her knuckles to the portable heater, breath fogging her face shield, then drops her hood and feeds bead to armor plate. The arc spits and sizzles, a white sun in a city of cranes. Across the bay, a foreman drags wet chalk across a slate. 29. The number looks smaller than the noise around it. Winches whining, chainfalls clanking, the heavy footfall of a gantry kissing a turret ring into place. Someone passes the rumor down the line, 500 tanks a day, and men grin into their collars. Women roll their eyes. Everybody keeps working. This is a government-owned, contractor-operated line under Army ordnance. The mantra is standardize, survive, scale. The M3 fixtures are pushed to the wall, M4 jigs dominate, and the Chrysler A57 multibank waiting in its cradle looks like 5 automobile hearts braided into one, ugly and obedient. The building itself is a fortress, thick concrete, blast baffles, blackout shades pulled when whistles sound. An inspector with an ordnance flaming bomb on his lapel checks tolerances with a feeler gauge, nods once, initials a tag. 30 a day is the talk when things sing. You get there by tack time and spare parts, not superstition. The rumor isn't arithmetic. It's a dare. A switcher coughs outside and flat cars bump together, the steel-on-steel thud like punctuation at the end of a paragraph. May flips up her hood, eyes stinging from the ozone, and studies the chalkboard while the slate sweats in the damp air. Tomorrow, the foreman says, tapping twice. We wipe it clean and start again. In Berlin, the map glows under a green-shaded lamp. Pins for New York docks, Detroit, Toledo, threads that start bright and fade into guesswork. Oberleutnant Franz Helbig, Abwehr, reads what is left after the Duquesne roll-up and Pastorius's farce. Fragments, rumors, the kind of intelligence that tastes like smoke. He turns over a captured pamphlet claiming American miracles, bomber lines in Michigan, trains of armor hammering east, and hears the same phrase from a port contact of a contact, 500 tanks a day. He knows better than to believe numbers that round that clean. Yet he also knows what his quartermasters report where the bombs fall. Bridges gone, rail timetables meaningless, fuel columns bled white by fighter bombers. The great cats, Panther, Tiger, are whispered like talismans, but the shops grind down for lack of parts that cannot be conjured. Helbig would have compared the American way, interchangeable spares, radios that work, trucks by the acre, with their virtuoso machines that demand virtuoso maintenance. He asks for sources, gets only silhouettes. He asks for confirmation, gets effects, operating strengths that recover faster than reconnaissance can count. At his desk, he copies the rumor in a tight hand, then brackets it. 500? The colonel wants certainties. Helbig has correlations. An America that can plan a bomber an hour could, in theory, retool for any number it decides it needs. The room smells of cold ink and wool. On the wall, a clock's second hand jerks forward, mechanical, relentless. Helbig closes his notebook and writes a single word in the margin to warn himself against the seduction of clean lies. Irrelevant. If the number is false, the battlefield will make it feel true soon enough. Ypsilanti, early 1944. Eleanor Briggs stands above the line at Willow Run, pencil tucked behind her ear, ledger open to a page ruled like a parade ground. A liberator noses ahead, control surfaces twitching under shop lights as if impatient to be weather. She marks a time, another hour, another bird, and feels the floor tremble through her shoes as the next fuselage arrives, sections mating with a clatter of cliquos and whispered curses. USO music drifts from a nearby break room. A boy from Indiana croons about home in a voice that can't be old enough for war. On her lunch pail is a note from a friend at Warren. December's chalkboard hit nearly 900 Shermans, the kind of number that would have sounded like propaganda 2 winters ago. She copies it onto the margin, approximately 900 in 1 month, 1 plant, and circles it hard enough to tear the paper. The impossible begins to feel routine. A bomber an hour, a tank every few minutes somewhere in America, rail spurs feeding Great Lakes docks, iced thin as sugar glass. She will later tell herself she should have known then why the 500 a day rumor traveled so easily. When a democracy learns tack time, myths hitch a ride on timetables. A British liaison tours the catwalk beside her, counting under his breath, wings, nacelles, fixtures, as if tallying a magic trick he'll have to explain back home. Eleanor explains nothing. She points instead to the parts cages, to standardized tags, to the clock that does not care what anyone believes. She stamps her ledger and imagines boxcars of track blocks rattling east while the liberator below rolls free, a minute hand ticked forward and turned into metal. Fluorescents hum over a wall of blueprints and parts lists, the air inside Army Ordnance Headquarters smelling of mimeograph ink and coffee gone to tar. A staff major runs a finger down a process chart that would have looked like madness before the war. Pig iron to plate, plate to hull, hull to tank, tank to depot, depot to front, front to rebuild, rebuild to front again. No romance, just routing numbers. The GOCO idea is simple and heretical. The government owns the plant, industry runs it like a stopwatch. In Warren, that means model changes executed without killing the line. M3 tools shunted aside, M4 jigs centered under the cranes, while Chrysler's A57 multi-bank, 5 automobile blocks harnessed into 1 power plant, gives maintainers a language they already speak. Radios aren't luxuries, they are doctrine, the net that binds armor to artillery to air. Spare parts are treated as ammunition, demanded in tonnages, not anecdotes. A logistics captain briefs a target cadence in the flat voice of a man who knows schedules win wars. 30 tanks a day when everything sings, roughly 900 in the historic month when the shifts catch rhythm. The numbers climb the way a platoon climbs a ridge, hand over hand, standard by standard, until they link across the map. Willow Run, stamping toward a bomber an hour. Truck plants filling motor pools so deep a private can smell rubber in his dreams. On a corner board, someone has chalked a reminder that is half prayer, half math. Don't chase perfection, chase throughput. The major flips a page and taps the line marked repair cycle. Days, not weeks. He imagines the spear tip this will fuel, the kid in an M4 somewhere in England, then underlines the only promise ordnance can honestly make. If it breaks, we'll get you another. Dusk turns the English motor pool to pewter, the rows of M4s catching the last light like patient animals. Captain Will Red Nolan walks the line with his platoon sergeant, boot heels crunching cinders, clipboard clicking against his thigh. His crew chiefs speak in a dialect of readiness, magnetos tested, idlers tight, radios loud and clear on the company net. Beyond the hedge, depots brood like steel cities, crates of track blocks, racks of 75mm and 76mm rounds stacked under tarps, fuel bowsers lined like cattle at watering. A British sergeant, cap tilted, swears the Americans can replace a company by Tuesday and gestures at the trucks that arrive as if on rails. Red doesn't argue. He's seen the manifests. Load plans are choreography now. Call signs, grid squares, timings, every pallet a promise. He knows the rumor that jogs through camps. From Portsmouth to Exeter, 500 tanks a day, and files it with stories told to steady nerves before first contact. What he can verify is better. A maintenance officer who talks about turnarounds in hours, not seasons. A signal lieutenant who hears battalion net as clean as a phone call. The doctrine in Red's pocket is combined arms, tubes and wings and tracks converging on a minute hand. And the language is brevity code, not bravado. Tonight he checks his men's letters home and pockets one with a grease print where a kid steadied his hand. The channel is close enough to smell when the wind shifts, salt threading the diesel. Red studies the silhouettes of his 4 tanks and thinks, we'll go through if they keep us fed and fueled. In the dark, a Liberty ship horn answers, and the motor pool feels like the last breath before a door opens. Paris stutters under curfew, bridges blacked out, the rail yards scabbed with craters that smell of wet dust and cordite. Oberleutnant Helbig studies a dispatch folder whose carbon copies shed violet on his fingers. Panthers fight like sword strokes, clean, terrifying, rare. Tigers lumber forward and then spend a week in the shop for a final drive that won't forgive rough handling. Fuel is a rumor told by men already walking. He drafts a memo that will not please his colonel. The Americans have weaponized replacement. Their bombers pulp bridges faster than sappers can patch. Their truck columns breed like locusts. Their tanks reappear in strength after a setback, as if the battlefield were elastic. He writes 500 per day in the margin and draws a line through it. The number, he admits, is almost certainly false. The effect is not. In 1944 alone, their industry will turn out on the order of 17,000 plus tanks and nearly 100,000 aircraft. The U.S. Army has already bought hundreds of thousands of 2.5-ton trucks, more vehicles than Germany will build armored fighting vehicles over the entire war. That is the impossible thing. The fact is pencil resists. A free nation's factories making abundance feel like a physical law. He notes that American radios work too often to be luck, that their artillery arrives on grid squares as if summoned by map makers, that the same serial numbers reappear on captured spare parts weeks after a defeat. A night train squeals into a siding with half its cars empty, the conductor walking the platform with his cap in his hands. Helbig closes the folder and chooses a single word for the cover sheet, irrelevant, because even a lie can be accurate when the truth is larger. Somewhere beyond the blackout, trucks downshift in unison like an approaching tide. The hedgerows hold their breath until the sky starts to mutter. Dawn, July 25, 1944, and the bombers come on like weather, formation upon formation until the light itself ripples. Captain Will Red Nolan squats by the glacis, checks his watch against the battalion net, the handset warm in his palm, the code sheet damp with dew. When the time comes, the air tears, the ground heaves, Cobra bites the wire. Red's driver keeps one boot on the clutch as the dust settles. They go. The platoon noses through the gap where hedges used to be. Infantry riding the decks, faces foxed with dust. A Sherman throws a track. Spare blocks and a breaker bar appear from a following half-track like a magician's handkerchief. Red smells hot gear oil and crushed greenery. Hears friendly fighters knifing low overhead, cover and spectacle in one blistering pass. Behind them, artillery battalions work to a script measured in truckloads, tubes red-hot and smiling. Ahead, the gap widens because, on the regimental map board, a staff captain traces a corridor in grease pencil that wasn't there at breakfast. Ammunition trains rumble up as if the roads were rails. Radio traffic snaps and hisses, but holds. Someone says 7th Corps fired on the order of 100,000+ rounds today, and nobody laughs. It's the kind of arithmetic that makes space where none existed at dawn. Red's wingman calls a grid and gets a full fire mission so fast it feels like cheating. Night brings triage. A loader goes back on a jeep, pale and blinking. A radiator steams itself empty. The maintenance wrecker hooks on, and the operator grins through grime. "We'll see her by Thursday, sir." Red believes him. In this army, promises ride in convoys. Night convoys ghost along chalked lanes, cat eyes taped to headlamps, exhaust turned to gauze by chill. The Red Ball Express runs like a bloodstream, drivers swapping mugs at waypoints, MPs waving loads past. The route moves roughly 12,000 tons forward on strong days. Captain Will Red Nolan's platoon draws from that river. Fuel Bowsers, crates of track blocks, and a transmission with his crew chief's name chalked on the lid like mail. In Detroit, Mae Russo hears in the canteen that her line's batch loaded to flat cars in a single night. She pictures couplers kissing under the gantry and a yardman's lantern swinging like a constellation. She writes to her brother in Third Army about the smell of cutting oil that won't wash away and tucks a chocolate bar into the envelope, as if sugar could travel with steel. At Willow Run, Eleanor Briggs marks hour and Liberator, then closes her ledger with a stamp that sounds like a verdict. At a forward depot, the quartermaster's world reduces to verbs: receive, sort, push. Pallets bloom into parts cages. Boxes become jobs on clipboards. Trucks become distance turning into momentum. Red watches a tank limp in and roll out 48 hours later with a new final drive and fresh mud, the crew grinning like men on shore leave. A French farmer counts vehicles until he loses the thread. To his ear, the road sounds like the sea. By midnight, the column is a moving town, mess smells, shouted jokes, a chaplain's blessing between gear changes. Behind them, another convoy forms, and behind that, a third. The rumor about 500 a day rides the wind again, but Red cares only for numbers that arrive on a truck. He tightens his chin strap and watches the cat eyes ahead bob like stars that have learned to roll. Lorraine freezes, and then the Ardennes hardens like iron, breath turning to smoke under the hoods as mechanics work by lantern, gloved hands slick with oil that moves like syrup. Captain Will Red Nolan listens to metal complain, starters dragging, final drives clicking with the cold, and thanks the quartermaster who found winter lubricants and heater kits before the mercury fell. Snow dulls the world. Engines wake it back up one cylinder at a time. The counterpunch comes like a door kicked in. Roadblocks bloom, woods erupt, maps lie in the dark. Red's platoon fights for time with artillery on call and radios that hold even when batteries sulk. A track shears. A road wheel cracks. In other armies, those are endings. Here they are tickets. A wrecker noses in, crew stamping their feet while they rig a tow, promising factory parts in 48 hours, because somewhere behind the ridge an ordnance company lives inside tents that breathe like animals. Supply columns arrive under blackout, fuel that smells sharp as peppermint, crates of 76 millimeters, boxes of spark plugs stacked like hymnals. In the mess line, a sergeant reads a clipping saying the United States built more than 17,000 tanks in 1944 and nearly 100,000 aircraft, and someone whistles low because those numbers feel untrue and yet keep showing up with stencils and cereals. Another man mutters that Germany built fewer than 50,000 armored fighting vehicles across the entire war, including about 6,500 Panthers, and then falls quiet in the snow. At dawn, the park coughs to life, mufflers steaming like cattle in a corral. Red checks his watch, then the column, then the horizon, and thinks of Detroit under snow. An engine catches, then another, a rhythm old as a factory whistle. They move because the nation said they would. The break room sits quiet after whistle, thermos lids cooling with tiny clicks, a chalk ghost of 500 per day smudged across the slate where someone's glove brushed it. May Russo stares at the mark the way a welder studies heat-checked steel, looking for cracks, not comfort. She knows the truth the way a timekeeper knows lunch. The plant's proudest month climbed toward 900 Shermans, not 15,000. 30 a day when the line sings, not 500. Yet the rumor keeps breathing because the rest of America refuses to slow. Willow Run pacing a bomber an hour, truck lines throwing out 2.5-tonners until motor pools look like cities. She would have smiled at the math on a good day. One factory's month nearly 900 tanks, a nation's 1944 tally well north of 17,000. Enemy totals for the whole war barely cresting 50,000 armored fighting vehicles when you include assault guns and oddments. The myth feels true because replacement feels inevitable. An ordnance clerk explains it to a junior lieutenant using the language of forms. Requisition, receipt, issue, turn in. Radios that arrive before the silence grows dangerous. Final drives with Cosmoline still tacky. Spark plugs by the crate so a private can change them like socks. May rinses her cup and thinks of the boys who will never clock out again and how a rumor can be a kind of prayer. Let there be enough for the next fight. Outside, a switcher bumps two flats together and the couplers answer like a handshake. The slate waits beside the door, gray with use, certain as morning. She picks up the chalk, tests its bite on the board, and writes the only number that matters for a line that must not stop. Tomorrow. The room smells of damp wool and cigarette paper. Spring 1945 light leaking through blackout curtains that no one bothers to draw anymore. Captain Will Red Nolan sits across from a German major whose boots are polished past reason and whose hands will not stop finding the seam of his cap. An interpreter works without fuss. The major talks in careful clauses about bridges chopped to stumps, rail lines that never healed, and fuel allocations so thin that company maps became wishful thinking. He does not complain about American gunnery. He concedes it. What undoes him is the rhythm. How tanks broken on Sunday fought on Wednesday. How radio nets seldom died. How trucks filled a horizon that was supposed to be empty. Red hears the same melody and other voices stacked in. Other rooms, logistics as verdict, replacement as doctrine, air superiority as saw blade. The major quotes a field note, Panthers superb, scarce, Tigers magnificent, maintenance prone, and then folds the paper as if closing a wound. When shown depot photographs, he studies the parts' cages like a man looking at a foreign alphabet. "We were not beaten by one number," he says at last, and the interpreter doesn't need to smooth it. "We were beaten by a system." Red thinks of the kid he sent home from Cobra with a bandaged shoulder, and how a fresh tank met them at the line that week, paint still smelling new. Outside, a lorry backfires and everyone flinches before they laugh. The major requests a cigarette and lights it with ceremony, as if acknowledging terms on behalf of a vanished army. Red pockets the transcript and feels the strange relief of hearing an enemy say what his own bones already knew. Summer, 1945, Warren. The whistle blows like a benediction and the plant exhales for real this time, steam fading from roof vents, doors yawning to daylight. Mae Russo hangs up her hood, the leather scored with a year's worth of sparks, and walks the line slowly, palm on the cool armor of a tank that came too late for combat. She knows the tallies now, by heart. Detroit Arsenal sending some 22,000-odd tanks to war across its seasons. A nation that in 1944 alone built on the order of 17,000 tanks and near 100,000 aircraft. Truck totals so large they sound like mistakes until you stand in a motor park and watch rows vanish into heat haze. Impossible on paper, ordinary in steel. Eleanor Briggs closes her Willow Run ledger, the last page stamped square, and takes a breath that tastes like machine oil and victory. Red Nolan writes 3 letters to families whose sons will not read them, and one to Mae's plant, addressed simply to the welders, because he has learned to thank people he has never met. He tells them what their abundance felt like at the tip. Radios that answered, batteries that cranked in the cold, transmissions that did not make him choose between risk and retreat. In a museum years later, a child will stand under an M4's turret and ask if the story about 500 a day is true. The docent will smile and say, not the number, something bigger. That a free people learned to turn schedule into strategy, parts into promises, and rumor into a feeling the enemy called defeat. A custodian wipes the old break room slate. Chalk dust lifts in sunbeams like snow in December, then drifts down on quiet concrete, and the building, at last, rests.